Hi, this is Zubair, and we'll carry on with our read through of The Road to Reality, a complete guide to the laws of the universe by Sir Roger Penrose. Before we delve further into the book, today we'll be discussing basically what's in the prologue of the book. But before that, I'd like to make a few things clear about the author's viewpoints in this book. The author takes a Hellenistic viewpoint of scientific development. That is, that he basically puts ancient Greece at the focus focus of the historical development of science. This I thought to make clear before we discuss this book further. He in the prologue he mentions that basically in the ancient times people thought of natural phenomena as being controlled by gods, and to gods basically they attributed certain emotions. So basically natural phenomena was a result of anger, happiness, etc. of gods, and to control various natural phenomena they thought that they had to appease these certain gods that they believed in. But certain people came to a realization that the forces of nature were far superior than what these societies believed, and the prologue basically contains stories of two different people who came to this realization. I have ascertained from the events discussed in this book that the timeline basically is in the range of 1600 to 400 BC in ancient Greek civilization. The first story is basically regarding Am-tep. Am-tep was the chief craftsman of the king of his time, and he was woken at night basically by a huge explosion. So he heard a huge explosion, and when he woke up, he saw dawn erupt from the north. Basically, he saw bright light coming from the north. He thought it was sunrise, but as everyone knows, sunrise is from the east. But when he saw a shaft of smoke and flames, his thoughts were confirmed that this actually was not the sunrise. He felt the earth shake beneath him and saw huge tides coming towards him, towards the island, as he was on the seashore. What he thought, in accordance with the views of his society, that the god daimon that they worshipped had been angered by the design of the sacrificial cup that he was making at that time. He saw ships being destroyed by the waves, and his people thought that sacrifices were needed to appease the angered god so that they would stop further damage. But the sacrifices failed, more tremors hit and destroyed most of what was left on the island. From this, later on, after this catastrophe, Am-tep survived. Later on, he was teaching his grandson about the stars. Basically, he was teaching him early astronomy. When he noticed that the positions of the stars had not been affected by the catastrophe that had occurred, there had been smoke and cloud for a few days, but everything in the heavens remained unchanged. In Greek mythology, heavens had a higher stature than the daimon. So, a disturbing thought occurred to Am-tep that if the heavens didn't care what the daimon did, heavens being higher in stature than daimon, why would the daimon care about the tiny people on the island? Why would the actions of people basically affect nature. So this was a very revolutionary realization, according to Mr. Penrose. This raised the question that who controls nature and how nature is controlled. Am-tep basically traveled across the sea. He left his homeland. Based on the timeline that I have ascertained from the prologue story, I think that Am-tep basically belonged to what is now called Minoan civilization. This civilization basically was centered in the islands in Aegean Sea, and the major island which they lived on was called Crete, the island of Crete, which is in modern day Greece. And the palace that that has been mentioned in the prologue is the palace of Knossos, which is basically in Heraklion city. The volcano that erupted is basically on this island in Thera, and the waves or the tsunami that hit the island and destroyed everything basically came from the eruption this way down. This is basically mainland Greece. And this is modern day Turkey. Let's move on to the next story, which basically the central character is Amphos. And this story is basically 1100 years after Am-tep and the volcanic eruption. Amphos is basically a descendant of Am-tep, and he is located at the location where Amphos moved to after leaving the island of Crete. So basically, Am-tep had seen how religious practices of people had changed after they had seen the volcanic eruption. But like Am-tep before him, Amphos thought that forces governing nature were unconcerned with the actions of the people, that these forces were somehow far bigger in stature than had been previously thought. Am-tep, like all the Greeks before him, was in search of order. Basically, they looked for order in arrangements of objects. We should say in physical arrangement of objects. He observed patterns in structure of plants, in small animals, in crystalline rocks. He was interested in agriculture also. So basically, he was interested in the question of how grains develop into plants, but the physical patterns did not give any answers for this question. Looking at the constellation, one day he was looking at the constellations, and he thought that these arrangements he could have done them better than the gods themselves. So let's look at a particular constellation, Orion. We can see that the constellation that has been marked by these lines, the actual stars, do not present a very good approximation of the picture that has been drawn behind him, the legendary Orion. This picture basically has been taken from an online version of Stellarium Planetarium. You guys should check it out, it's very helpful. So when he was looking at these constellations, another thought, an intuition came to him. It was that instead of searching for order in the physical arrangement of objects, he should search for order in the behavior of these objects. What this meant was that the pattern in which the seeds were planted was not important, was not in fact as important as the behavior of these seeds, of how they grew into plants. That is, that each plant, for example, was similar in its growth. The phases of its growth, how it developed from basically seedling to fully grown plant. From this, an amazing realization came to him that the laws of nature must be very precise. For each seed to basically follow this pattern, the inherent laws of nature must be very precise. And another associated but a very revolutionary thought or idea that came to him was that our ways of thought must also be precise, otherwise we would be led astray. So basically he had these two major ideas. Number one, precision of laws of nature, precision of human thought and reasoning about the said laws. In the same time, he heard of a sage, a wise man, basically in the area of Croton, who preached that the laws of nature were mathematical. That is, they were rooted in the notion of a number and its application to geometrical forms. Basically, what is being said is that what we observe physically follows geometrical forms. And to this geometry, we can associate numbers to aid in reasoning. So, the geometrical forms and the associated numbers provide both the precision to the laws of nature and precision to the human thought and reasoning about these laws. So Amphos basically left for Croton to meet this wise sage, whose brotherhood at that time contained 571 men and 28 women. The name of this sage is Pythagoras, who is a very important and key figure in development of mathematics, as we will learn on later in this book. So basically, the area Croton is in southern Italy, and it is basically the city of Crotone in modern days. I'll just like to mention that Pythagoras and his brotherhood were very important in development of science and mathematics in ancient Greece, and we'll see them featured heavily in the earlier chapters of the book. For now, this will be it. I hope to meet you again soon. Thanks for your interest in these videos.